Hello, you're welcome to Across Cultures on Saskatoon Radio CFCR 90.5 FM. I am Nguyen. On Across Cultures, I have cultural conversations with guests from a diverse cultural background to promote understanding and foster a sense of belonging as enlightened residents of a multicultural society. On this episode, I'll be talking about the cultural experience of second-generation immigrants from the lens of two guests that I have here with me in the studio today. I have Theodocia Quagraine, who was born in Ghana and raised in Saskatchewan. She is deeply rooted in her Ghanaian heritage and passionate about uplifting Black communities. Theodocia channels this passion through initiatives like co-authoring Courage, Change, and Faith. She also co-founded BIPOC Coffee Talk, which teaches coding to Black youths, and being involved in a non-profit called Daughters of Africa. Welcome to Across Culture, Theodocia.
Thank you for having me.
Great. I also have with me today Tyler Nguyen. Now, I should have asked you before we got started, is that how to pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, there's like multiple ways of pronouncing it. It's either like Nguyen, or the like correct way would be like Nguyen.
When? I knew I messed it up. Sorry about that. Okay, so Tyler Nguyen is in the studio with me today, and he is a second-generation Chinese-Vietnamese immigrant, born and raised in Saskatoon. He currently serves on the boards of Saskatoon Open Door Society and BGC Saskatoon. Tyler is committed to supporting others, whether it's through sharing insight on Saskatoon's business and economic landscape over coffee or contributing to community organizations that make a difference. Welcome to Across Cultures, Tyler.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we get started, I feel like it would be helpful to explain what second generation means. And according to Statistics Canada, second generation includes individuals who were born in Canada and had at least one parent born outside Canada. In 2011, second generation immigrants consisted of 5.7 million people, which represented 17.4% of the total population in Canada. There is another group of people who are called third generation or above, and these are people who are born in Canada with both parents born in Canada. In 2011, third generation and above comprised of 19.9 million individuals, which accounts for 60.7% of the total population. So looking at this, we see that over 70% of the population in Canada either identifies as second generation or third generation and more. However, there are some immigrants who, although were not born in Canada, but came into Canada as children, infants, toddlers, and they identify as second generation immigrants as well, because they don't have they didn't grow up in their culture of origin. They were raised in Canada, and I think that's the category that Theodocia fall on today. So today we have Tyler, who falls within the category of what Statistics Canada refers to as second generation immigrants, and Theodocia, who falls within the category of people who self-identify as second generation immigrants. Looking at being second generation from a cultural lens, how would you describe your cultural background? I will start with you, Tyler.
Yeah, so like usually when people ask like, what's your culture or what's your background, I just say like, Chinese Vietnamese, if that's what they're asking. But then usually I just leave it at that.
Okay, so your background is Chinese Vietnamese. Great. How about you, Theodocia?
For me, I usually describe myself as 100% Ghanaian because that's where I was born. That's what both of my parents are. So I would identify as Ghanaian.
Great. I think it's really important to ask that as a backdrop to the other conversations we'll be having today, because a lot of times there is a difference between cultural background and cultural identity. Usually cultural background has to do with your origin, based on your parents' origin, the place where you were born, your place of birth and all. But cultural identity is a little bit different, because irrespective of your cultural background or your cultural affiliations, by way of exposure, places you've been to, cultures you've embraced, the people within your inner circle who might be from a different culture that you have embraced part of their culture, a lot of times you can see two different people that are from the same, have exactly the same cultural background, but do not have the same cultural identity. So starting with you again, Theodocia, how would you describe your cultural identity?
That's hard for me to say because it really changes day to day. So I feel like there are days where I identify more with being Ghanaian because I'm still connected with the music, the culture, and everything. But I'm also really connected with my, I guess, Canadian roots as well, as far as my interests and maybe some of the ideologies that I believe in. So I would say I'm a mix of two, of Ghanaian and Canadian.
Great. We will come back to that, ideologies that you have embraced, because that's really important. Tyler, how about you? How do you describe your cultural identity?
Yeah, it's definitely more like let's say if someone come and ask like, where are you from? I just straight out say like, I was born in Canada, even though I know what they're asking. But that's because like, I feel very in tune to being Canadian, but I also will let them know that, yeah, I'm Chinese Vietnamese. But then, yeah, growing up, it's definitely that Canadian Asian kind of thing. And it wasn't always like, saying, I'm Chinese Vietnamese. I would just cut it short and just say like, I'm Asian.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take you back a little to the question you just asked, or the question you just mentioned. When people ask you, where are you from? That is the question that people ask a lot. I hate to admit it, but I hate that question with a passion. And I hate the question because I feel like people ask that question with a preconceived idea in their mind. Because I ask myself, if I had been a white person, a Caucasian white person, would you be asking me where I am from? So you're asking people where they're from because there is a preconceived perception of who a Canadian should be. And so you're seeing this person who does not fit your perception of who a Canadian should be. And the first question you're asking them is, where are you from? And when you say, I'm Canadian, I'm from Canada, and they say, where are you from originally?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? What is usually your first response to that question? You said you would say Canadian. And when they say, where are you from originally? What do you then say?
Yeah, I would say like, I'm half Chinese, I'm half Vietnamese, but I was born in Canada.
Great. How about you, Theodocia?
Well, first I want to say I do understand how that gets you upset, and I definitely get upset by that as well. I have noticed, though, I don't get upset when people of color ask me that, because I just feel like it's, let's figure out where, we're both from. Yeah, but when people do ask me that, and I'm getting the impression that, okay, me saying that I'm from Saskatoon is not going to cut it for you, then, I will usually just say I'm Ghanaian. I was born in Ghana.
Yeah. Do you think that question in itself is offensive? What's your perception about that question itself? And also looking at people, for you, Theodocia, you already said if it's people of color that ask you, most times you understand the reason why they're asking you. It's like, oh, you look like me. Let's figure out, are we from the same place originally and all of it?
Right.
But when that's not the case and somebody is meeting you for the first time and the first thing they're asking you, like, oh, where are you from originally? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just because, like, yeah, I'm kind of like indifferent to like a lot of those type of questions. It doesn't really affect me as much, just because like as long as you know who you are, like, you know, what other people are thinking shouldn't really affect you. And yes, like most of the time it like does sometimes. But then I think it's also like for them like being curious and wanting to kind of learn where you're from. So like I don't really see it as a way, or in a way where it's like ignorant of them trying to be more like offensive or like divisive to either me or anyone else. Yeah,
how about you, Theodocia?
I'm gonna have to agree with that as well. I don't take offense to it, because most of the times where I have experienced that, they feel like I'm Nguyen, and I feel like they're trying to fish that out of me. But when I was living in small town Estevan, I was annoyed because I got asked that a lot. And when they asked it, it made me feel like I was an outsider, even though I was raised here in Saskatchewan. So I didn't like that in Estevan. But when I get asked that questions in cities, it's usually trying to understand my cultural identity.
Yeah. I would say I take offense sometimes when people ask me that question. And I've had somebody, I guess it's because I always wondered what's the reason for asking the question in the first place. Like I tell people, before you ask somebody that question, take a step back and question your own motive for asking that question. Why are you really asking that question? Is it because there's something about this person you want to figure out? Like you said, they probably have been to Ghana or know a few people that are Ghanaians, and they're like, I see some similarities. I want to figure out, am I right? Am I wrong? Or is it, you don't look like you belong here. Where are you from? I've had somebody ask me that question in a very different way that I found I appreciated a lot. So I was at a Canada-wide event in Edmonton that had a lot of people from across Canada attend the event. And one of the days, it was like a conference, one of the days I wore my traditional attire. And a lot of people were asking me, oh, where are you from? And I would always say, I'm Saskatoon. And I would say, no, where are you really from? Because of what I was wearing, I got that. But there was one person that asked me, what culture does your outfit represent?
Oh, that's nice.
I took a pause because I realized he had already communicated his intent for asking that question. In other words, he's still asking, where are you from? But his intention was, oh, there's something about your outfit. I want to figure out what culture it represents. So that's why I said most times I want people to take a step back to question their motive for asking the question and rephrase the question. I've had people say, oh, I asked the question because I'm really surprised you speak English. So instead of asking me where I am from because you're surprised I speak English, ask me, how come you speak English? Because you assume that people who look like me don't speak English or don't speak good English. So for me, it's really making your motive shine, come out when you ask those kinds of questions. And that's why I particularly find the question offensive. I think another thing for me is a lot of times there's no follow-up question. So if you're asking me where I'm from originally, and I tell you and you leave it at that, it makes me wonder, why were you asking?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, if people were more specific with like their question instead of, being more general and like what they're saying when they ask, where are you from? But then like, if they were to be more specific in terms of like what they're asking, because then like if they were just say, oh, I noticed you're like Asian, what kind of Asian are you? Because then that would actually provide more interest, or like have more like a genuine connection. But I think that question also stems from like it's just a easy way of like a quick question just to ask someone. It's the same thing like when I go networking to like either different events, conferences. One of the first few questions like, you know, where do you work? Who are you with? That kind of thing. It's just like more of a first standard question. So yeah, a lot of the time I don't think it's really comes from like a place of ignorance from a lot of people. Generally, mainly because I think there's more good people than bad.
Yeah. And like you said, it's an icebreaker. People, and that's why I said most times it's people who are meeting you for the first time that are asking the question. So I understand that it's an icebreaker, but icebreakers are meant to help you get to know somebody better. There is more to a person than where they're from. And if you ask me where I'm from and I tell you, and you leave it at that, it means you're making assumptions about people who are from where I am from. You're not really trying to get to know me.
Right. I was going to ask you if you feel judged when people ask you that question. Or that they will judge you once you respond.
No, it's not the judgment that, it's the fact that I can't quite figure out why you're asking the question.
Okay.
And that's why I said I always prefer take a step back and ask yourself, why am I interested in the answer to this question? And ask, for instance, instead of asking, oh, where are you from? You kind of look like someone I know who is Ghanaian. Are you Ghanaian, or do you have a Ghanaian background?
Right.
That's more personable.
Right.
Than where that's a personal opinion anyway. I don't want to impose my personal opinion. Yeah, but that's it. And I think another thing for me when it comes to this question is, especially for second generation immigrants, not all second generation immigrants are in tune to their culture, to their cultural background, the way you both seem to be.
Oh no, I'm not.
But you love your Asian food, don't you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you speak your language at all?
I can speak a little bit of Cantonese. I can understand very little of Vietnamese, but that's mainly because like growing up in my household, my dad mostly spoke English to us, and then my mom spoke Cantonese. But growing up in like elementary, high school, the English speaking, like it's more dominant. So like in our household, we would primarily speak English with my siblings and my dad. With my mom, it's like broken Cantonese.
How about you? How in tune are you to your cultural background?
Well, I would say I am fairly in tune, but I have lost the language, which I feel like disconnects me quite a bit, because I'm not sure if you've seen these videos of people who know multiple languages, but once they start talking to people in that language, it's just like this feeling of connection. And I feel like I don't have that because I don't speak the language anymore. But as far as cultural connection, staying connected to food and music and things, I still feel connected to my Ghanaian
culture. Yeah. So like you said, you're not as in tune to your culture as somebody who identifies fully as maybe your parent, for instance, right? So when people ask that question also, I would imagine that the follow-up question would be, oh, tell me more about your culture or something of that nature. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's probably like a easy but also like difficult question, just because like I'm not as in tune to like my culture in terms of like the traditions and everything. I usually like try like just stop it at where it's like I introduce my cultural background. My parents are both from Vietnam, but my mom is actually full Chinese and my dad is full Vietnamese. But yeah, they both grew up in Vietnam and then immigrated to Canada, and usually I don't get any more questions than that.
Well, that is great to know that. So now let's take it a step back to talk about how you already said you're not so in tune with your culture, but growing up with parents who are fully from another culture, because you both are mixed, being raised in Canada and all, growing up with parents who are like that, did you kind of struggle with your cultural identity growing up, especially as a teenager, still trying to discover yourself, learn more about yourself, and then you have parents whose culture is different from where you're trying to imbibe with your Canadian culture, and with things in school, you try to do things a little bit differently, Canadian, in a Canadian way. Did you have a little bit of struggle with that as teenagers?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start because I was actually having a conversation with my sister about this not too long ago. And for me, I did struggle when I was a teenager because this is more to do with religion than culture, but maybe still tied to culture as well. But there was a lot that I could not do when I was younger, which made me feel isolated from my peers. And something that I do wish that parents of second generation kids would consider is that this is a different culture from where you grew up in, and your child feeling connected to their peers is really important, especially as a teen. So I wish there was more effort to connect me with my peers, even while still maintaining their beliefs and stuff. Yeah.
How about you, Tyler?
Yeah, for me, I wouldn't say like I struggled with my cultural identity. I kind of knew who I was, and like I was proud, being all Chinese, Vietnamese, Canadian, and yeah, growing up until grade 6, elementary school, it was primarily Caucasian. And the only like visible minority was my siblings, my brother, my sister, my cousins, and then like a few other people. But like growing up, everyone was actually really accepting. Like I didn't actually experience like racism. There would be like a little bit of like jokes when they do like the ching chong kind of thing, but like I don't really take offense to that because like it's a stereotype, and like most of the time like stereotypes don't really apply to like a lot of people, because it's more so like generalizing and like what people base off of on like physical features, things like that too. Yeah.
So going back to what you said, Theodocia, about you wished your parents had made the effort to connect you with your peers without necessarily leaving behind or neglecting their own personal beliefs, religious beliefs, and all that. What were there specific things you wished they could have done, or especially now, because some of the things you do involves mentoring kids and coding lessons for kids? Do you see some things in second generation young children that you wished their parents would know how to connect them to this culture and make them not feel isolated? Maybe that's not the right word, but there's a little bit of isolation there, right?
Right, yeah. And I should add, maybe integrating into the dominant culture, that can't work with the belief system, but I really want to emphasize being connected to peers. So if I felt like I was connected to other Ghanaian peers, I think maybe it wouldn't have hit me as hard, but that wasn't present. I think there was one other Ghanaian girl in my class. So I feel like it's better now here in Saskatoon. There's a larger community, but like, let's say if I had kids, I would make sure that they were connected to a Ghanaian community.
Okay, so when you were talking about connection, it was more of cultural connection with your peers.
Right, yeah.
Did you have that as well, Tyler, growing up? Did you mix more with Asians, or did you see a lot of people, your peers that were Asians that you had connections with, or was it mainly? I know you hinted on it earlier. Was it just mainly Caucasians?
Yeah, so up until grade 6, it would primarily be like Caucasian, indigenous people. But then like after when in grade 6 when the government started to introduce immigration programs, especially to the Philippines, and there was a influx of Filipinos coming to Saskatoon, I end up having more friends with them and hanging out with them a lot more, mainly because like, you know, they were Asian, and then because I'm also Asian too, there's just more familiarity, just because like you realize that you are both different, and like it's something that I don't want to like feel, but like it's just something that like, because like you know you're different, that like you just feel different. And then even like in high school, slowly end up getting more like Chinese friends through like the international program that they have at different high schools and stuff. So then I slowly like got away from like my Filipino friends just because they primarily spoke Tagalog, and like, you know, I don't, so it's really hard to like understand or connect with them. So then it's a lot easier to be with either people who spoke more English or either Cantonese. And yeah, in high school it was harder because like I bounced around from like many different friends groups, just because like for me in general I just always felt different to everyone, and I'm not sure if it's mainly because of the different cultural background or if it's just like, you know, my type of personality. I'm like generally, or I grew up very shy, quiet. I would probably say I'm a lot different now than who I was before, but definitely when it comes to like people who are of your same culture, you just feel more like with your peers. It's a lot easier to connect with them.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to go on a break now, and when we return, we'll talk about cultural difference, the difference that you were talking about. So please stay tuned as we take a commercial break, and when we return, we'll continue the conversation on the cultural difference experienced by second-generation immigrants from the lens of Tyler and Theodocia. Are you a newcomer to Canada for less than 1 year? Immigrants Muse, in partnership with TELUS, offers newcomers a special phone rate starting at $34 per month, with 50 gigabytes of data and 1,000 minutes for international calls. For starters, you can get a free no-obligation preloaded SIM card to help you hit the ground running for the first month when you land Canada. After that, you can retain the same number with TELUS preferred rates for newcomers using our code DCC7691. You don't need a credit card or credit history to access this offer, but you can use this to build your credit history in Canada. So what are you waiting for? Visit immigrantmusemagazine.ca to access our exclusive newcomer offers. Welcome back to Across Culture on CFCR 90.5 FM. If you're just tuning in, I have Theodocia and Tyler with me today, sharing their cultural realities as second-generation immigrants. And before we went on the break, we were talking about cultural difference. So I would like to explore the cultural difference that you've noticed between you being a mixed, trying to work within your Canadian culture and your cultural background, and also your parents' culture. So I'll start with you, Tyler. When you look at your parents today, or maybe growing up, what are some of the cultural differences that you noticed between you and your parents, or maybe cultural conflicts that you noticed between you and your parents?
Yeah, I probably would say like there wasn't a lot of like cultural differences. Like they have become more Canadianized, just because like, I don't know, you like being in Canada for so long, you just slowly become accustomed to it. And yeah, growing up, we would always go to Vietnamese church, opposed to like we would call it the regular church.
The Canadian church.
Yeah, but usually it's in the evening. So like if we don't want to go in the evening, we'll go to regular church. and that's primarily like Vietnamese. So I'm probably more in tune to like my Vietnamese culture. But then also growing up up until like maybe for like 2 years, I also went to like Chinese school. So then for me, I always looked different to the other Chinese students, just because like I'm half Chinese, half Vietnamese. But I think in terms of like the cultural differences, I don't think it's really that much different right now. It's probably more or less, depending on like perspective. But like I stopped going to church, whereas my parents still go to church. And we're not really big on traditions. We'll celebrate, New Year's, certain like Vietnamese thing that involves church, but then that's pretty much it.
How about you, Theodocia?
That strangely was pretty much my experience as well. So yeah, my parents are very Canadian. I think they probably almost lived in Canada longer than they lived in Ghana, nearing that point. So I mean, there's a couple of traditions that they've kept and that I didn't adopt. So for example, I really like hiking. I went jet skiing, I went hiking, and I know they would never do anything like that. So I mean, there's differences like that, but for the most part, I feel like they've really adopted the Canadian culture.
That's actually a really great point. I think a lot of second generation immigrants are more adventurous or more willing to take like risk or like try new things, whereas our like parents, they're very slow to like try anything that's different. Yeah. But like even like hiking, like my parents wouldn't exactly do that because like they're also getting older, but like that's not something that they would have really thought growing up. But yeah, for like second generation children growing up, like all we want to do is like have fun, experience the world, that kind of thing.
When you talk about now that they've grown older and some of the things that have changed and they've become more Canadian, do you see how that, or is there any way that it impacts their relationship with family members back home, if they still have extended family members back home? And do you also have relationships that you try to maintain with your home culture back home, maybe with family, extended family members back home? Is there anything like that?
No, if there's like extended family, I would leave it to my parents to like keep that connection, that relationship with them. And for my mom, like majority of her family, like they all came to Canada, either one by one. So like a lot of them are like spread across Canada. And then my dad's side of the family, it was him and my uncle and maybe like another one that actually came to Canada first and then helped the whole family or majority of the family immigrate to either Canada or the US. So when it comes to like connecting with family either back in Vietnam, there isn't really much except for like the once a year, like I don't know what they use, FaceTime now.
Have you ever gone to visit your country of origin?
No, that was something that was like talked about growing up. When we were all done university, my parents would take all of us and have us see like how they grew up and everything. But like that was like we graduated 5 years ago, and
that never happened.
Yeah, that never happened, mainly because of like COVID too. So like that pretty much like paused it, and I don't feel like we would actually go anymore unless like someone really feels strongly
about going. How about you, Theodocia?
I'm like holding in a laugh because that's exactly my experience. Like exactly. So my parents, they want all of us to go to Ghana as well. I really hope we do go because that's something that I really want to do. I haven't been to Ghana since moving here at 4 years old. So I'm very disconnected to it. I don't really know my extended family. So that's something that I do want to do.
So when it comes to belonging, I know that you probably, since neither of you have gone to visit your country of origin, there's no issue of, oh, I don't belong there and I've visited there, I don't feel like I belong there. But in Canada, how would you describe your level of belonging in Canada? Especially being that you're so rooted, at least better than I came to Canada as an adult. I consider Canada home now, but when people still talk about my home country, I still refer to Nigeria as my home country. But for both of you, when you're talking about your country of origin, Canada is basically your country of origin. But then going back to that question we're asking earlier about origin and some of the other things that you maybe have experienced, do you feel a strong sense of belonging in Canada?
Yeah, I think like without a doubt, I would probably say like I actually do feel Canadian, just because like I was born in Canada. Like I just grew up with all of my peers and everything. So like there's no like question like, oh, you are not Canadian just because you either speak a different language or you have a different cultural background. And I think like when you're born within a country, you just feel more, in tune or acclimated with like who you are just because like you were born.
Yeah. How about you, Theodocia?
I do feel like I belong here, and I do feel I belong more in different provinces. So my sisters and I, we have this goal to visit every province and territory in Canada.
How many have you visited so far?
BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Montreal, or Quebec. So we did those ones. We still have, Nova Scotia and Maritimes and but we've been to quite a few at this point. Yeah, and I've noticed a difference with other provinces. I feel like I belong more, like for example, Toronto. I know Toronto is so multicultural. I don't feel like an outsider in Toronto at all. And then also places in Alberta. I just feel like the more diverse it is, the more I feel like I fit in.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what you were saying about when you lived in Estevan and you were offended more when people, because they asked you that question an awful lot compared to being in Saskatoon. So yeah, the more multicultural the society is, the more welcoming and the more feeling of belonging that everyone has within that community. But are there specific things in smaller cities, other than that annoying question, that reduces your sense of belonging? What are there specific things that you can think about that reduces your sense of belonging in those smaller provinces, smaller cities? Or is it just being in a place where you see a lot of people that look like you and you feel more affiliated to?
Well, I would say the feeling of not belonging in places like Estevan for me is not meeting people who have the same interest or experiences as me. So yeah, it was really hard for me to connect with people because we just didn't have a whole lot in common compared to other culture or other provinces where for whatever reason we're just interested in the same things. I feel like I belong more there.
I think it also has to play in like being able to see diversity. Like when you go into like these small towns, you don't see diversity. Everything is like the same. But then when you go into the larger cities, you actually see like all the different cultures, all the different people, whether or not they're like wearing different clothes and stuff. But then there's also like different restaurants. You can have different cuisines. You can try every other culture. Where it's like in the small town, there is probably like a Chinese restaurant. I think like there's like a Chinese restaurant like in every like city's town.
No matter how small the town is, I bet there's a Chinese restaurant there.
Yeah, because it was like that or like a McDonald's, I feel like. But not really, because like McDonald's they need a certain population to actually locate or have a store there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also it's about, like you said, you don't really see diversity in smaller cities, and it's not just the restaurant and all. It's also about activities, right? Not seeing a lot of cultural activities as well that you might be interested in smaller cities. And yes, people say when you don't see, try to initiate. But when you try to initiate in smaller cities and there isn't a lot of people embracing what you're initiating, it can be really discouraging as well. So talking about initiating, are there specific things you try to do to stay in tune to your cultural identity? Not cultural background right now, but cultural identity. Maybe as a Canadian Asian, as a Canadian Kenyan, is there any particular activities or organizations that you try to affiliate yourself with to stay in tune, to stay connected? This connection is very important and it's an important aspect of belonging.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and it's also like one of the reasons why I'm on the Saskatoon Open Door Society's board, and also like BGC Saskatoon, or formerly known as Boys and Girls Club of Saskatoon. Just because when I went to elementary school, there was always a Boys and Girls Club, and although I never went to it, I would always hang out with my friends like on Thursday night gym blast. But like also, yeah, with the Open Door Society, it's just more so in terms of like giving back to the community, but then also speaks to who I am, I think. Growing up, it's just like always helping others, trying to try to be like a role model for other people, just because you don't actually see that, you know, out in the business community as much.
Yeah. Theodocia?
Yeah, for me, I do put effort into connecting with African descent or even people of color communities. And I started this around 2020, actually. The George Floyd and the whole pandemic, it really impacted me quite a bit. And at that point, I just decided I'm really tired of being the only Black person in the room. And I really put an effort to be active in a lot of Black communities. So, for example, I joined an organization in Regina called Daughters of Africa, which has been really great. They do a lot to help the Black community here in Saskatchewan, and just other organizations like that. It's really helped me stay connected.
How important do you think those kinds of connection is? Like you talked about, the turning point for you was the pandemic and the whole situation around George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and all of it. How important do you think it is for second generation? At the end of the day, it's a personal decision, right? From one person to another. But how important do you think it is to stay connected to activities and organizations like that, especially as far as personal identity is concerned?
Well, for me, I'll just express how it's important to me. Because I felt like an outsider most of my life. And when I started actively seeking those Black communities, I didn't feel like an outsider. I mean, yeah, there were some things that we didn't connect with because, you know, different upbringings and whatnot. But for the most part, I felt like I belonged. I felt accepted by these group of people. And I think that's important, especially when you are a minority in a culture. I think it's really important to have that connection.
Yeah. You, Tyler, you were talking about some of the things that you don't see in the business community because you work in the business community as well. And of course, business community is all about we're there to make money and see how we can improve the economic viability of Saskatoon, understood. But when you look at Saskatoon as a whole, are there specific things you would like to see that you feel like we need to do more of these to build our cultural vibrancy as a society, as a city.
Yeah, like I don't necessarily need to see more like, Asian faces, or need to see like more um, Asian leaders, or like those in like power, or the CEOs or executive, things like that. But it's more so about like having everyone like embrace diversity, embrace embrace people's differences and like cultures, and not really doing the minimum, or like pretending that they like care, but just like appreciating the fact that Canada is a multicultural country. I know Saskatchewan is probably least multicultural compared to the other provinces, just because of our population. But like, yeah, for me it's just really more so like having people embrace it a lot more, instead of just like, yeah, where are you from, and then that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Theodocia? What are some of the things that you wished would be in Saskatoon to make it a more culturally vibrant society?
That's a good question. I would love to see a variety of activities that are presented in the city where you can connect with other people. Like, for example, I've joined a couple of dance classes, completely different culture from mine, and I love how I get to learn about their culture, meet new people. It's just, a great way to connect with people. So I would love to see more activities like that.
That's a good point too, because there's a Saskatoon Folk Fest, but like generally when you go to a lot of those things, it's mostly like people from that culture going to their own pavilion, and then there's a little bit of like Caucasian or like other people wanting to experience and taste other cultures. But like that would be like one really good example in terms of like embracing diversity and culture.
Yeah, because what you really said about embracing diversity and culture, and I think people of diverse cultural backgrounds need to do better when it comes to this, myself inclusive. We tend to be drawn to something we're familiar with. Maybe it has to do with being within our comfort zone, and not wanting to go somewhere where we might not be so comfortable. And a lot of times, I believe that we just need to have an attitude of curiosity, to want to learn more, to experience more about other people's culture, to get to know more about other people's culture, in order to be more embracing of the diversity. Because Saskatoon might not be as diverse as Toronto, as Calgary, Edmonton, and the rest of it. Still, it's more diverse than some other smaller cities as well. But the people, residents of the city, need to do better to embrace diversity, like you said. So, is there a particular culture that you have tried to learn a thing or two from? It doesn't have to be language, doesn't have to be food. Just out of curiosity, you just decided, I want to learn more about this. Like Theodocia said, learning about dance culture of another, or the dance steps of another culture, or just meeting diverse people. Because it's really important, right? We live in a global village. That's what the world is called now. It's a global village where we meet people from diverse cultures, and it's important for us to know a little bit about their culture without a sense of judgments, right? And another thing I kind of see is people are scared to offend other people. So they don't want to ask questions because they don't want to sound offensive. They don't want to. I think the only question that offends me, there are just two questions that offend me culturally, other than where are you from originally, is how come you speak good English? That's the second question that offends me. But still, I think a lot of times I see beyond the offense, and you can really see when people are authentic in their question, even though they might not ask the right question or they might not ask the question in a less offensive way. You can tell when someone is authentic and truly curious to know, not because they are condescending or anything like that. If we look at people generally, other than trying to say we need to embrace more diversity, are there specific things that you think we can do to embrace diversity? Did you say there are specific things that we can do to embrace diversity?
Well, for me, this is more to do with the individual, and I feel like people need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I feel like that's one of the advantages that I've had being second generation. I am so used to being an outsider and uncomfortable that me being the only person in the room, it does not bother me. And I feel like that is why I've embraced so many different cultures. I've learned a lot of things. You know, I have a friend group that's just all over the place. And so I feel like, yeah, people need to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
I think that is really important. Cultural conversation is a very uncomfortable conversation because you can learn things that you might not be so comfortable to learn about, things that you don't agree with. And I think people also need to understand you don't necessarily need to agree with the culture to ask about it. You don't need to accept it. It's learning about it, respecting it, understanding it, but it doesn't mean you embrace the culture, right? Has there been a particular thing you learned about, you don't have to mention the culture, you learned about a culture that you felt kind of uncomfortable with, but still feel like you had to give them the respect anyway?
I want to say that's an interesting question. I'm not sure if that's something like, I think about.
Kind of threw that one at you unexpectedly.
I want to say like no, just because like when you're coming from like a different cultural background, you just learn to like respect other people's cultural background. But that could also just be like, you know, growing up, you know, treat others the way you want to be treated. So like just treating everyone equally and with respect, which should be really the standard. Going back to like the activities and stuff, I think if there was like more artwork to reflect cultural diversity, I think it would help a lot of people to feel more at home or belong to either the city or the country. Because like if you can't see, you know, different people, like if you were to go to Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, I'm not sure about Montreal, maybe Montreal, I've never been there, but you can see diversity. But like for either cities or provinces that have less diverse population, maybe like all cultural artwork that represents different culture and more color too, would make a huge difference.
Yeah, I love what you talked about artwork that represents culture. A lot of things people have said is representation matters a lot. I want to see something that is representative of me, and I understand there is quite a lot of cultural representation in the city, in Saskatoon, in Saskatchewan. So maybe not completely all the specific cultures can be represented. But when you see something from Asia or an Asian artwork, you kind of know. It doesn't have to be specifically Vietnamese or Chinese or Indian, but you kind of know and you feel connected to it. The same thing with Africa. It doesn't have to be specifically Nigerian or Ghanaian or Cameroonian, but you just know this is artwork from Africa, and then you feel really connected to it. I think that's something that's really missing as well in this city that I would like to see as well. You know, cultural representation in the artwork, and I think also representation in organization. And that's one thing I specifically love Saskatoon Open Door Society for, right? The board has great representation, cultural representation.
Oh yeah.
And I really wish other organizations could be like that. I've seen organizations that claim to service Indigenous people, and there's not one Indigenous person on their board. How do you explain that? I've seen board of a city board, city of Saskatoon, or even a provincial board that is not culturally diverse for an organization that is serving the full Saskatchewan population or the full Saskatoon population, and it is not diverse. There isn't a lot of representation there. So I think representation is one thing that I also would like to see. Whew. We have come to the end of the show today. How time flies. It's been so interesting to really have this conversation about the cultural experience of second generation immigrants. If there is one last thing you want to say as far as your experience is concerned, what would it be?
I mean, I would say I've actually really liked my experience being second generation. I mean, as I mentioned before, because I'm not phased by being uncomfortable or feeling like an outsider, I feel like it's led me to be very open-minded and therefore really embrace just all elements of life, the beauty of life.
Yeah, I'd probably say the same thing, but like definitely like growing up, I kind of do wish I had a lot more peers that were either Chinese, Vietnamese, just because like you feel more sense of belonging. But then like in terms of like language, I also wish I can speak my languages a lot better instead of just like broken Cantonese or not barely understanding Vietnamese. And I think like that would be like a huge thing, because like now growing up, I wish I did a lot more to be able to like know that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tyler and Theodocia, for joining me today on Across Cultures. It's been such an enlightening experience learning about your cultural experience as second generation immigrants. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. And until we come your way next time with another episode of Across Culture, keep staying curious and respectful of the diverse culture in the city. Bye.